This video is sponsored by Verve. Verve is the new and best platform to find all your favorite apps and shows together. Stop opening and closing your apps because your shows are in different places. Verve offers a one-stop shop solution at a discounted price. They've got Crunchyroll, Funimation, and even a horror channel called Shudder. Verve definitely has something for everyone. You could be watching My Hero Academia or Happy Tree Friends, the most backward, disturbing show ever. You can get in on this deal today with a 7-day free trial. Then it's just $9.99 a month after that. The trial gets you 8 different apps with all their shows for a third of the price. Plus, they're ad-free. So start streaming your favorite shows across any of your devices today. Go to verve.co/combo pack. That's VRV. Thanks, Verve. Diving is like being a wet astronaut, except you might get eaten at any moment. This world is a strange one. Diving is a way to explore the underwater worlds that exist below the surface. The Earth is mostly water after all, so most of our own world is a stranger to us. So tonight, I've got some allegedly true diving scary stories for you that might just make your skin crawl. So throw on your scuba gear. It's time to get wet. Number 1. The Phantom in the Wreck. Submitted by Wreck Diver. Allow me to give you some background on what I do and the region I'm from. I work as a public safety diver for the local sheriff's department. I recover anything and everything that goes into the water, from airplanes and buses to stolen firearms, jewelry, and cars, and sometimes even bodies of both people and pets. Outside of that job, I'm an avid technical wreck diver. Us technical divers go far deeper than the average scuba diver. We have intense training, dive exotic gases like helium, and we run a much higher risk of something going catastrophically wrong. We cannot simply surface from 200 feet, as something debilitating or death may even happen once we reach it. That means when we're down there, we're on our own, and we have to carry everything we need on a single dive. We accept these risks, as the deeper you go, the more pristine and intact the wreck becomes. Honestly, there's no feeling like being the first person to lay eyes on the ship since it sank, and then you become a part of her story. The Great Lakes offer the best shipwreck diving anywhere in the world. The cold, freshwater preserved shipwrecks from the late 1600s all the way to modern times. From wooden sailing ships that look like they can still sail all the way at the bottom of the water, to massive steel freighters that you can't believe were overwhelmed and sunk by a furious lake. Not to mention the Great Lakes also has the highest concentration of shipwrecks per square mile than anywhere else in the world, with an estimated 10,000 wrecks. That's more than 10 times that of the legendary Bermuda Triangle, and it's only a 1/12 of the size. Lake Superior is the largest of the 5 lakes and also holds the title of the deepest, the coldest, and the most isolated of all the lakes, along with the fewest diveable shipwrecks. The cold, black waters holds many of her secrets and dead crewmen, as it's too cold for natural processes to bring them back up. As you can imagine, many of these wrecks still hold their crews inside the hulls on eternal watch. One such wreck is the steel package freighter of the Kamloops. The Kamloops lies in one of North America's most isolated regions, Isle Royale National Park. Isle Royale is separated from the mainland by 50 miles of cold, fresh water. It's a lake diver's dream, as Lake Superior has yet to be ravaged by invasive species like the zebra mussels that infest the 4 other lakes, which makes Isle Royale the most contented place to dive in the region. So one day we leave Wendigo Harbor and begin the 12-mile journey to the Kamloops. Now, the Kamloops is Isle Royale's deepest known wreck at a depth of 270 feet. That day, the water was covered with a thick fog, which is caused by the cold 37-degree water and the warm air above it. This effect lasts from April to July every year and never lifts even on calm days. This makes ambient light down at depth almost non-existent. We use a mixture of helium and oxygen to allow us to have clearer heads, as regular air becomes buoyant below 200 feet. And this wreck lies less than 200 yards away from the shore, and I'm the first one in. It's an honor. As I begin my descent, I quickly begin to lose daylight, and at 100 feet, it is pitch black all around me. But the water's calm and my breathing is good, so I can continue another 85 feet down before I hit the stern rail. Upon reaching the stern of the ship, I drop my stage bottles that contain my deco gases, and my plan today was to penetrate the engine room, the crew quarters, and the galley before turning around and heading back the way I came. Not to mention I was curious about a certain situation. Apparently, the body of the chief engineer that resided in the engine room had his head knocked off by an errant diver who did not know proper finning technique. As for the Kamloops itself, it disappeared in a horrific gale in December of 1927, killing all 22 men and women aboard. The Kamloops was a floating general store, as she carried everything from farm equipment and cars to whiskey and even Lifesavers candy. I know, it's ironic. Now, that's not to say that some people didn't escape the Kamloops, but those who did ended up dying on shore. The Kamloops is thought to have run aground on the rocky bluffs, as some crewmen and the 2 women jumped onto shore. As those who could made preparations to survive, the ship suddenly slid off the rocks and into deep water, taking a sizable portion of the crew with her, leaving 8 to 12 stranded survivors to starve to death out in the snow. Isle Royale is completely uninhabited in the winter, as even the lighthouse keepers go back to the mainland, leaving the shipwrecked survivors to their fate. Some were taken by wolves, others died from frostbite and hypothermia. The last person believed to have been alive was the female cook, who ironically again starved to death on April of 1928. The bodies were found in mid-May, and the heart-wrenching note was clutched in her hands. With all of this in mind, I begin my entry into the engine room skylight. Once inside, my light hits the headless body of the chief engineer. He was floating neutrally, buoyant, near the boilers. I swim past him and say a prayer for him in my head as I head for the hallway. I get the feeling that he does not want me on his ship today, but I have to press on. As I begin my penetration, I do a quick turnaround and see the headless body a few feet away from me. Somehow, the headless body of the chief was now only a few feet away from me. He was now 15 feet away from where I'd first seen him. A chill ran up my spine, but I shrugged it off as he was kind of floating. I make my way down the hall another 20 feet when I find the crew's quarters. I shone my light inside and I see another crew member in his blue coveralls laying on the floor near the bunk. You can feel the tragedy of this sight. So I say another prayer for him, and I can only imagine what he went through during his final moments. Now, I've been diving for a while, and I've never felt like this before, but that strange eerie feeling I had near the chief was coming back, and it's hard to describe. Chills were running up and down my body the whole time, and I can tell you now that it wasn't from the cold or the pressure. So I do a quick turnaround again from the way I came to see if I kicked up any silt during my penetration through the wreck, hoping that it was still clear for me to exit back the way I came. I turned and my light again lands on the headless corpse less than 5 feet away from me. How was that possible? Now I start to feel panic rise up in me. This just isn't right. I deal with bodies on a regular basis, and sure they float slowly, but they definitely don't follow me around on an abandoned ship. Rational thinking went right out the door, and true fear starts to well up inside me. My breathing rate picks up, and I cannot get over the fact that I have a headless corpse following me around the ship. Breathing like this and panicking is exactly what you're not supposed to do at 200 feet. I knew full and well that a dead body wasn't going to hurt me, but I simply cannot bring myself to swim past him and back through the narrow hallway where I would certainly run against him. Touching this corpse was the last thing I wanted to do. I decided that I would try and find an exit in the galley. I wasn't 100% there was one, but I was going to take my chances. I head my panicking rear down the hallway and into the galley. Because I lost my composure, I begin to kick up silt behind me, so there's no going back. But my prayers were answered, as I found empty windows and door frames to exit the wreck. I squeeze through the narrow opening, and I haul my scared self out of there. I turn around one last time, and I shine my light down into the silty galley, and once again, chills cover me when I see the headless body floating near the window. I shout through my regulator at the corpse, You definitely ruined my dive and made me freak out, but you made your point and now I'm getting the heck out of here. I swim back to where I dropped my deco stage bottles and I begin my long ascent back up. Along the way, I regained control of myself, my breathing, and my heart rate, and I saw that I burned through more gas than I was comfortable with. I had 4 other divers pass me on their way down to the wreck, and I wrote on my slate to stay out of there. They must have heeded my advice, as they saw my eyes wide as a tea saucer, and that I was trembling. Not from the 37-degree water, but from fear. I was so happy to reach the boat. Technical divers usually dive alone, because having a partner is more of a liability than an asset, and they can't do much if something goes wrong at depth. But after this, I was really hoping to be with someone the next day. So the next day, and after a weird night of bizarre and terrifying dreams, a warm southern wind came and blew the fog away, showing the island in all her glory with calm, sheltered seas, and added to a bright sunny day. It really made the ominous feeling I got yesterday disappear. I decided I would break my rule and dive with a buddy this time. I once again began my descent into the cobalt blue waters of Lake Superior. And unlike yesterday, I had daylight down on the wreck today, so there was much more natural visibility. I decided today that we needed to put the engineer back into his engine room and make amends for yesterday. This time we entered the galley, and sure enough, there was the headless body. I swam towards him and gently grabbed his arms. We then proceeded to swim down the hallway into the engine room. It was a technique I'm proficient at. It was similar to what I do when recovering a victim. Once we were by the boilers, we stopped swimming and I let him go. Then I swam out of the skylight and turned around, and this time he stayed right where I left him. I've dove that wreck once after this, and I plan on returning again in the future. But I know that if my gut is telling me that the engineer doesn't want me in his boat, I'm dang sure going to heed it. What I believed happened was that I was swimming through the wreck, and the body got caught up into my wake. This caused the buoyant body to follow me around the wreck. When the next day came, I was more careful with my finning. This did not cause a wake, so not exactly paranormal, but definitely creepy. For anyone interested in seeing this wreck, we've posted a video on YouTube called Kamloops Shipwreck. There is also a nice Wikipedia page on her as well if you care to check that out. It's under SS Kamloops. Thank you all for listening. Number 2. Scuba Diving Death. Submitted by LENNOX. I'm a 16-year-old girl from Virginia who is a scuba diver. My story takes place at a small quarry that has been filled with water. I was there for my final scuba exam to become an open water diver. There were a lot of people at the quarry, so my dive master got us in the water as quickly as he could. The class consisted of my friend's little brother, a boy who was my age, and his father. We had one more test to complete, but the boy's father signaled his arm was hurting, so he surfaced, and we just continued. After some time, we heard a commotion from the surface, so we surfaced as well to see what was going on. And to our surprise, there was an ambulance and a police car. We swam to land and took off our tanks and fins and approached the ambulance, only to see the boy's father bloated and blue. The EMT was there administering CPR, and then they rushed him to the hospital. As this was happening, I looked around and saw a person dressed in black on the other side of the quarry, just in the tree line. He was just standing there, watching the situation go down. It was kind of creepy, but maybe it was just an onlooker. A couple of days later, we found out from the police that the father had surfaced, and he was disoriented, so he swam to the wrong side of the quarry. This man in black was standing on a rock, and the father swam to him, probably asking for help. But the guy just stood there, didn't offer any help, and he watched the father drown and left him there. The guy in black wasn't found, and I'm going back to that quarry in a couple of weeks, and I don't want to see that guy again. Number 3. The Creature Under the Boggy Water. Submitted by Untold Comfort. I live in southern Missouri, where there is almost zilch to do. Luckily, I'm much of an outdoors kind of person, so I often find myself outside, walking through the woods, sitting in the grass and reading a book. Stuff like that. A few months back, I decided to take a swim in a nearby pond. Now, don't get me wrong, this really isn't a pond like all the locals call it. It's huge, probably 150 yards across, with waters that reach about 25 to 30 feet deep. But still, to everyone here, it's just that pond. Anyway, one day it was pretty warm out, and the muddy water was actually beginning to look tempting. So without parents around to get onto me for swimming in the nasty water, I walked right in. The water was cool, though a bit gritty from the dirt. All in all, it felt nice, and I stayed in the shallow water, half on shore and half submerged, soaking up the sun while trying not to overheat. Suddenly, I heard a large splash. I gazed out into the distance in the middle of the large pond, and I saw huge ripples as if a big fish had just disturbed the water. It was nothing out of the ordinary, but it did catch my attention. So for a while, I sat there and focused my gaze across the lake's surface, hoping to catch sight of more jumping fish. Well, I didn't have to wait long. Whatever had made those ripples came back, and as soon as I saw it, my eyebrows went lopsided. I had no idea what I was seeing. It looked like the tail of a jet black fish. It just came out of the water then slammed back down onto the surface. The thing was absolutely massive. Just the tail part alone that I had seen was bigger than me, and I'm about 5'9". To be honest, it almost looked like a tendril of some kind, but I pushed that silly idea out of my head. Ain't nothing in Missouri got tentacles, I told myself. So the next day came, and I was eager to go back to that pond. For one, it was hotter than it was the day before, and two, I really wanted to see that weird fish again. This time though, I brought some diving goggles, so I could hold my breath and dive under the water for a while. They worked fairly well at the public water park, so they were worth a try at least, even if the pond water was cloudy. After a 10-minute walk through the woods, I reached the pond's edge. I took off my shirt and donned my goggles. I even wore swimming trunks for the occasion, which my parents must not have noticed. Then I walked in. I was instantly met with the same gritty coolness from the day before. It was both gross and refreshing, though that might sound a bit bizarre. As soon as the water was up to my collarbone, I dipped my face in the water to test my goggles and to see just how bad the visibility would be. But I was amazed. The dirt and mud floating in the water was only a thin layer at the top. I don't know what was in the water to make it do that, but about a foot below the surface the water was clear. I was so excited at this point, I began to rush further into the water. I didn't even think about it at the time, but I must have been making quite a commotion to all the creatures underwater. I tried to stay where my feet could touch the bottom as much as I could, taking in big gulps of air before diving several feet under the water, searching the bottom and looking for wildlife. But I was losing hope for getting another look at that jet black fish again. After several dives and seeing nothing of the sort, I was certain that I had scared it away with my commotion, but I continued to dive. It was fun enough, even if I didn't see that strange black fish again. After an hour or two, the sky began to get orange as sunset was coming into view, so I decided to call it a day with plans of coming out tomorrow already rushing through my head. I swam toward the shore, searching with my toes for the floor of the pond. But the first thing I felt with my toes wasn't sand or dirt like I'd expected. The first thing I felt was like wet rubber, and the moment I stepped on it, it pulled itself from under me fast, and then my leg began to burn as if it was on fire, and instantly I panicked. I started to thrash about, trying harder to get to the shore, now confused and terrified at what was causing the pain in my leg. I still couldn't feel the ground below me either. Then, as I paddled like a madman, something told me to turn around. I tried with all my might to ignore this feeling, but curiosity and fear forced me to. I turned around to face the center of the pond. Lo and behold, just below the muddy water in the pond, there was a mass of black, only inches from me. It was bigger than any creature I'd ever seen in person. It must have been about 17 or 18 feet long and 6 feet wide. My first thought was that I must have kicked up a different colored soil, clay or something like that. I couldn't move. I was terrified and in denial of what I was seeing. I floated there, staring at this mass of darkness. Then I had the stupidest idea. I wanted to look under the water, past the dirty layer, to see what this thing really was. I wanted to be sure that it was nothing. I wanted to confirm to myself that there was nothing to be scared of. Like the idiot I was, I readied my goggles and I dipped my head slowly into the water. Inch by inch, the debris gave way, and soon I was locking eyes with a creature that seemed to have jumped right out of a sci-fi movie. Its body was completely smooth, like if you touched it, there'd be no resistance, no scales, anything of the sort. There weren't even any fins that I could see. But that wasn't the first and most frightening thing that I saw. The end closest to me was apparently the face. I saw two off-white eyes that seemed to glow under the water. It reminded me of those glow-in-the-dark stars all the kids used to stick in their bedroom ceilings. Just under those eyes was a mouth with two large and very obvious fangs protruding downwards. This creature, it was just waiting there. Maybe it was blind and it couldn't see me. But it knew I was there. Maybe it was just waiting for me to move. I had no idea what to do. I stayed as still as possible, eyes closed. Then I pulled my head slowly out of the water. I breathed in slowly, now petrified. This thing, it could kill me easily if it wanted to. At least it looked like it could. But thankfully, after several long and painful minutes, the mass turned around and it swam away. The moment I could no longer see it, I raced to the shore, this time with no creepy creature problems to distract me. When I was on the shore, I quickly examined my leg, expecting the worst. There was a paper-thin cut about 8 inches long on my right calf. It burned still, but there wasn't much blood coming from it. Later on, it healed up just fine. But something tells me that it could have been much, much worse. I haven't gone back to that pond since. But every chance I get, I tell my friends and family the story of the monster I saw while underwater that day. Not too many people believe me, though. And number 4, Vacation Horror, submitted by ROANOAKE. Several years ago, my great-uncle committed suicide. He owned some sort of piping company. I don't really know all the details. So his wife inherited quite a bit of money. Now, of course, my great-aunt became very lonely and depressed. She quickly began inviting family over for trips to different vacations around the country. It was nice, but it was sad seeing her spend her money just to have company. I felt bad for her. Well, one day she invited my brother and I to go on one of these vacations. It was a cruise, and it was my first time on a cruise. To be honest, I was more scared than excited. I may have taken Titanic to heart more than I should have. Not to mention I got motion sick easily. 10 seconds into reading something inside a car, then bam, I'm puking up my guts. Anyway, this cruise would be part of a getaway to Hawaii. After a nauseating plane ride, we arrived, and we were quickly enjoying ourselves. But the very next day after we arrived, it was time for the cruise. So we boarded and got settled. Then we took in all the sights, stopping at several locations to experience the local life there. At one of these places, we docked and we got the chance to scuba dive. I didn't really want to. If you can't tell by now, I was scared of my own shadow. And I didn't want to go underwater with God knows what was down there for any length of time. I'd probably be eaten by a giant squid or something. But everyone else was pushing me to try it, especially my grandma who had come with us and my brother. They kept telling me, when would you be able to do this again? So just to get them off my backs, I said I'd do it. Luckily, the instructor said we'd only go under for about 15 minutes each, considering like every passenger there wanted to do it too. I was nervous, and my time soon came. They let us out onto the edge of the dock next to a small storage building. Once there, they strapped us down with the equipment, which was far more heavy than I thought it would be, which only made me more nervous. Once everyone was suited up and ready, one of the instructors with their gear got in the water, then offered each of us a hand as we got in. It was now or never. I swallowed hard and told myself it'd be over in a flash. The water was very cold, and I could taste the saltiness of it in between breaths from the breathing apparatus. From the look of the thing, I thought it would be airtight. Maybe mine was on wrong or something, or maybe I was just paranoid. The few of us that got in began to follow the instructor silently under the water. He would beckon us with hand gestures, then swim effortlessly around coral and schools of fish, all while keeping an eye on us, making sure we could get around okay. You know, honestly, it was pretty amazing. Untold numbers of different fish and sea creatures were all over the place. They seemed almost completely unfazed by our presence. Slowly, my body warmed up to the cool water, and my breathing got calmer. And I couldn't believe it myself. I was actually having a good time. But 15 minutes goes by faster than you'd think. After an underwater group picture and merely circling the dock, it was time to head back up. And yeah, this is where things got bad. We were very close to the wooden dock as we came around the side and descended it at the same time. I could feel my legs skimming over the side of one of the legs of the dock. And in an instant, I felt a deep, sharp stinging pain in my thigh. Then, suddenly, I could no longer move upwards. My suit had apparently been snagged on something. I looked over to the wooden leg, only to see a massive splinter in the wood stabbing into my wetsuit. The thing was a good inch into the flesh of my leg. Seeing it made it hurt so much worse, and I couldn't breathe fast enough to get air into my lungs. I was officially panicking. I tried to remain calm, trying to get my leg free. Then I looked back up to the group, only now they weren't there anymore. They had left me behind. Now I know when they got to the top and saw that I wasn't with them that they would come back and look for me. But in the moment, my mind was rearing. I thought this was where I was going to die. And then everything went black. The next thing I remember, I'm in an ambulance with my grandma. She looked like she had been crying. Apparently, going crazy with fear underwater triggered an episode of epilepsy. I had had a seizure, which was bad because I had taken in some water too. My grandma was scared to death that I had gone into a coma. I was okay though, except for the huge gash in my leg and the fact that I apparently had epilepsy. I'd never had a seizure before in my life. I'm not lying when I say this was the most terrifying moment of my life, and it didn't help me overcome my fears, it only made them worse. When you throw on a wetsuit and dive underwater, you're unlocking a whole new world to see. There are new landscapes, new creatures, and not to mention new ways to die. As with any new adventure, there are new dangers. So be careful and cautious out there, because you never know which corner you turn next will be your last. Good night. Be sure to like, share, comment, and subscribe if you enjoyed the video. And don't forget to send us your true scary story soon at darknessprevails.org. Thanks.